Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Allison. I'm here with K-Rise Systems. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar going over how to optimize the JDE master record regarding POs, items, vendors, AP invoice, customers, and more. This will be presented by Doug Pulaski, our Director of Sales and Marketing, and Ben Terrell, our Solutions Architect. There is a question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to utilize that throughout the presentation should you have any questions, and we'll get those answered towards the end of the webinar. And with that, I will pass it off to Doug.
Allison, thank you very much. And the people in attendance, thank you for taking your valuable time to make the decision to attend this webinar. I want to make it worthwhile. From my perspective, it's showing you the solutions, but we are going to kind of set the stage with some PowerPoint slides. Then I'll go into a demo. And then what we're going to do with this particular webinar is we're going to focus on the workflow engine which to me is the biggest reason why when companies come to us and they say we want to improve the processes, we want to shorten the time, reduce the errors for any type of master record onboarding, be it a purchase order going through a purchase order requisitioning process, or an item master, or a vendor, or a customer, or an AP invoice. The workflow is very centric to what's usually the as-is emails and Excel and shared folders, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Most webinars, by the way, I focus on a specific product, but this is focusing on many areas of business functionality. So with that, let me go through the slides. And K-Rise, we're in Aurora, Illinois, although exactly I'm working from home right now for the obvious reasons, but that's our headquarters, suburb of Chicago. We've been around since 2005. We've focused on JD Edwards value add. We go beyond JD Edwards. We work with many other systems too, but personally, I've been involved with JD Edwards back when I was an employee, going back to 1997, and we focus on specific areas of value add on the commerce side of JD Edwards. E-commerce payments is like credit card, vendor buyer. Those are some of the products that we're going to be highlighting today, and that leads right into the third bullet item there, the master record onboarding process, which I just talked about. And then one thing I'm going to emphasize when talking about our workflow engine, it's one component of a very enterprise level no code platform. I like to draw the analogy with JD Edwards. JD Edwards, everything apps is based on JD Edwards tools. And why it's so popular, especially with manufacturing and distribution type companies, is because of the power of the platform, especially now with Orchestrator and such. But clients have always been able to personalize it, not have to go to Oracle JD Edwards to recompile the code, and make it very personalized and customized for their company and marketplace. We have many customers. These are just a few of them, big and small. Some of the ones I'll be referencing today: Fox Network, Chevron, First Quantum, some of the case studies that relate to this webinar. And let's talk about the platform. And it's a low code platform. What does that mean? It means we've taken the complexity of creating applications and integrations from the process. We're not a .NET or a Java or C# type programming language company. We do things from a canvas, whether it's the GUI, the logic, the data source, the workflow, using a drag and drop like Visio. And that's what you'll be seeing today with the technical demonstration that Ben will be reviewing after I do a quick demo. But on the bottom there, you see that we do have connectors, not only to JD Edwards, but many other enterprise systems, and note the custom systems. I mean, we have a robust what's called SDK. So like with REST RESTful endpoints or SOAP web services or iframe integration. We can pretty much accomplish anything. And this is especially important, by the way, with the workflow. Many times, based on some of the products I'm going to be showing, people ask, can, like a vendor onboarding, can the vendor initiate it? Which is very, very common. And the answer is yes. So definitely the workflow works outside of JD Edwards. And this is from JD Edwards. This was actually a Collaborate Lyle presentation from couple of months ago, and he positions JD Edwards, and they talk about the value of using low, no code app UI alternatives. And, and they specifically reference many of the low code vendors out there like OutSystems and Mendix, and Appian, and we fit into that category. Where we're different is our expertise with JD Edwards integration. So this is also from JD Edwards. They promote the idea of using applications like ourselves, using the integration standards that JD Edwards has provided, like Orchestrator and working against the business functions, and basically doing the customizations, these types of value add onboarding to improve the business processes from tools like ours. And we fit right in. In fact, we feel we're the best fit. And if we look at our architecture engine, what we're seeing here is the enterprise application level, and that's getting, like I said, with JD Edwards Orchestrator, that ties to the RESTful, the AIS server of JD Edwards, which is REST endpoints, and that's that component there. And any database, we work with any CNC infrastructure or any non-JD Edwards database. We have all the drivers there and the security. But if you look at the easy process, and the apps I'm going to be creating are all based on easy process. Like I said, same thing as JDE apps and tools. So you can almost think that we have one product, and then we have these gallery components that you're seeing up here in the right. And I'll emphasize that because when I'm going through vendor onboarding and PO requisitioning and PO a change process after the PO is created, these are all gallery components, and it'll make a lot more sense as we go through the demonstration part of the demo. Where we create the applications is right here with the UX designer. This is the canvases, the Visiolite canvases I was talking about. So we have a logic engine, and we have the workflow engine that you're seeing there, and the data modeler, and they all work independently and work with each other. And then we have full DevOps functionality like you find in tier 1 low code application development and integration platforms like Easy Process is, dealing with project management, task tracking, and source control, object level, just like JDE, through dev and test and production and full monitoring. And then, at the upper layer level, we work, in fact, I note that in the webinar, the mobile component. So we try to base things on standards we're using for our native app. So for mobile, we have, the responsive and the adaptive technology built into the code to form factor. Say I've got an iPhone to iOS, Chrome, Safari. Then we have a native app component, and that's important with notifications. I mentioned that in the abstract for the webinar. And so we're using the Facebook. It's called React Native. It's open source. So I'll show that component, but more and more, buyers and suppliers out there, they're getting younger. They live on their smartphone. They like the idea of apps. They like the idea of a notification from an app instead of a traditional email. Tie it to a specific sound. You see the notification coming in. So we feel that's a real important element, especially when you're talking about the approval notification. But I'll mostly work from the email perspective, like most people are used to. Now look at on the bottom. This exemplifies our JD Edwards expertise with working against the business functions and orchestrator and BSSV SOAP web services and everything that you've done in your JD Edwards in terms of, say, a standard or a customized business function. We have it all covered. UDCs, when I'm going through the forms and I'm selecting things like payment terms for new vendor onboarding, the data source is going to your UDC containing those values. The vendor name is reflecting JDE, which I think is 30 characters. So all of those are mapped to make it a great and quick app development process. Now the gallery is a concept with our latest version of Easy Process. It's a web version, which makes it great. The IDE is the Interactive Development Environment. It's based on Chrome. So what we've done is we've taken the various apps I'm going to be showing you: Easy Buyer, PO Planning, Vendor Onboarding, Item Onboarding, and we've put them in the gallery. This is a read, and there is the install button there. And Ben's going to talk about this concept of being able to do proof of concepts with companies like yourself in a very unique manner. I noted that in the email. We promote POCs. We've got a community edition. We can quickly install it. You can go through e-learning if you want to have development ownership and do things yourself. That's your option. There's no vendor lock when you're working with K-Rise. And then the second step we can do with this PLC is we can take our what's called ECC connector, tie it to your JD Edwards. Very, very efficient. We used to do VPN, but folks don't want to open up a port because of security. So we use something called Easy Cloud Connector based on WebSocket. And so the demos and the functionality I'm going to be showing you at no charge to you, you can do this yourself. So what we're going to be covering is the benefits of automating the process. And in the email that I sent out, I noted David Lyle from Carolina citing item master onboarding from 6 to 8 weeks down to 1 to 2 weeks. That's huge. It directly relates to and tied to reduce errors. It directly relates to the business process benefits, business benefits that we're looking for. Workflow complexities. Ben will get into that when we show the workflows, the integrations, the user permissions, and like I said, it's going to be a live demonstration. And I'll go through some examples. I can't go through full demos start to finish across the various projects that I'm touching to show the workflow examples. I do have those demos. I can send you links or I can arrange a full demo afterwards. I'm just going to focus on the workflow components and actually creating it in JD Edwards. So we have a number of apps from our gallery, and I'm going to show them from a gallery perspective. And one is a PO requisition. It's creating a PO. And actually, this is a great workflow for Ben to really get into the details on, which he will. So we'll be reviewing that in the next 45 minutes. Here's one on PO Planner. I'm actually going to show that. Vendor master onboarding, I'm going to show that. If I have time, I'll show the item master. And what I wanted to do is what you're seeing here, it's our platform. And you see the swim lanes with who's the composing profiles, the users, and the approval. And JDE is actually just a batch process that goes to JDE to create in this case, the vendor master record in the address book. But what we're showing here, and I wanted to show as an example, is a real life workflow. So we have these demo environments that are kind of generic, and that's not what the end production looks like. This is more end production, and I'm not showing it as our workflow. I'm showing it as during the requirements, this particular client, and it's a mining company, a very large mining company. JD Edwards has a lot of mining companies. It's a strong vertical for them, but they're showing an actual their workflow that then we took and created inside of easy process. And this is very, very similar to how we work with our clients and defining the requirements and quoting. If you want us to do the services, you could do it yourself. And so for them, they call it ANSI. And I forget what ANSI is about, but you're basically seeing the workflow moving from the requester. And by the way, this is an item master. This is supplies for this huge, it's the largest copper mine in the world down in Panama, but it starts with requester, and that item might contain a new vendor. So if that's the case, there's a section on that that deals with address book validation, creating a new address book record that has to start. And so that person is involved. For other items in the item master, you can see that submit with existing vendor. It goes right to inventory, goes to procurement. You can see the various conditions with request clarification, goes to another level of inventory control clarifications, but it gets to item crate, and then it looks at the logic, the workflow logic, and it says on demand no. Now, I don't know the details. I'm a sales guy, but I know at a high level, on demand no means that there's no reorder quantity stock, that it has to go through a workflow process for, it's called ANSL, that's what the company calls it, for approving the stocking values. And you see that here. And then it does a complete after, the item crate in JD Edwards. So I wanted to show that as an example. This is very, very involved. And so once again, the production workflows, this is actually Carolina they presented. And with Carolina, they've got sub workflows. In other words, they have parallel workflow processes dealing with the editing on the lines, another sub workflow dealing with the purchasing. So the workflows can get very, very involved. This is Fox. They're just one view of it. It's actually 9 levels deep. This is Fox Network. They were bought about a year ago by Disney, and once again, very involved with vendor onboarding. And from a case study perspective, you can see there are 5,000 vendors a year, and this was their GUI that they created with our vendor onboarding. A lot of documentation, depending on your role. Are you the vendor or are you internal? This is their new GUI. They had us update it. You're not going to see this on the demo. You can see the forms, what they're asking is an example, dictates the workflows, like is this government? Here's one, banking information. It detects the address, and if it's North America, banking information comes up ACH e-check. If it's outside of North America, it shows wire transfer. So it's a very, very intelligent form. This is that first quantum, the form that they're doing. So with that, I'm thinking, before Ben gets into the technical details of the workflow that business people can definitely understand, let me go through, say, a VOB process, at least a partial VOB process, and VOB is vendor onboarding. So with that, okay, here we go. So with Marion Johnson, what we're doing here is showing what that gallery app looks like. So I talked about doing a proof of concept. You can do this yourself if you install Easy Process. And what we do is we work off of AWS, and we simply send you a deployment tenant for you to use. Then you hook up the ECC, and then we enable the projects that you want to consider, like vendor onboarding, and this is what you see. So it's not the production like you saw with Fox in terms of the GUI. That can be done later. But with this, what we're dealing with is, do I want to create a new vendor? And this is based on users. So Marion Johnson is a requester, and she has the permissions to enter that in here. Something else that she might want to do is do an import. So if I wanted to upload the vendor and do an import, this is a shortcut. So I'm importing from an Excel, and vendors can download an Excel and work from there. You're going to find that all of our apps have strong Excel integration. And we like to think that what we're doing many times is taking Excel standalone processes, turning it into a complete app while still using Excel within the app, like you saw there. So if I wanted to change this to November supplier 89, I could do that. November supplier. So now I go through, the asterisk indicates that it's required fields. So I can override what I brought in on the Excel, or I can, the fields that are blank. And this is what I was talking about when we're creating this form. We're saying, okay, where should payment terms go? And that's the example of your UDC where you've got your payment terms. So we're working with the source of record, and that's JD Edwards, and noted net 30 on here, and other, the data sources, it doesn't have to be JD Edwards. It could be any database or Excel. And I'm selling widgets. Let me quickly go through this, make a change to this, and say that all the addresses are from the same selling widgets. And so this is questions that could be edit boxes like that. It could be select countries, give me a value of the buy. A lot of our workflow is tied to threshold dollar amounts. And let me fill out these. These are all mandatory. And accounting information, yes. Let's select an attachment to go in here. Now, Ben's going to show the workflow. And when he shows the workflow, he's going to show from that diagram the conditions, such as withdraw. And exactly where does that go? It's withdrawing this request. It's or saving it for later, coming back and saving it for later, or initiating it within the workflow. And this is coming up and telling me, hey, you forgot some fields there. And I go, that's fine. And so I submit it. And with that, you can see this is our internal record that we created because it's not in JD Edwards. And this is Marion Johnson. And we can see for that submission that it's now at AP. And by the way, you can come down here and look at the pretty much what I call the roadmap for these various submittals. So this one you can see was a while ago. It was completed by Marion. It went to AP, and you're going to see that in just a second. AP has to add some additional values to the form. It went through operations, and Ben will talk about how we configure the users tied to the workflow. It goes to finance. It goes to an AP manager. An AP manager is Vanessa, who has full Like some of these roles, they only have read only. So with Vanessa, she has full control, can make any changes. Maybe she wants to call up and change the supplier, at that stage of, actually getting the values or other edits. We created the order in JD Edwards, and you could see that. Uh, so or we added the vendor to JD Edwards. We do AP Manager again, another edit. And this is now the vendor created in JD Edwards. I can show you it's 62818. And then it creates a terminate process. So what I wanted to show is, I'm not going to go through the full demo. I don't have time. But if I was to log out, in fact, I can even close down and come in here to my email. And you can see that this is Anita that received the request, and she's AP admin. And if Anita logs in, Anita goes right to the form. And what I wanted to show here on this form is this section wasn't there before. So Anita needs to fill out that. And by the way, Anita does these are open, so she can edit. So at the field level, you can say make invisible, read only, allow edit. So Anita does have that permission, operations doesn't. And I can go through that, but I wanted just to show some real live, forms so you can get a sense of how these applications work. So we're going to go, so this is the PO requisitioning. And like I showed you with the prior, we can go all the way to creating the order in JD Edwards. We create the PO in JD Edwards, and there's some other additional things that I wanted to show you and let me see if I can do this real quick. So with JDE, so we create the order in JD Edwards, and I don't have time to go through it. So let's do something here. Let's quickly create an order in JD Edwards. And this will just take a second. So I'm going to do it against 4343, which is Aspen paper. And I created the order. Let me grab a pen, 5433. And let me add a couple of items, M001, quantity 9, quantity 5, P001. So with that, I create a purchase order. So part of our onboarding is not only creating the record, but editing the record. So with that, let me go into, I need to move the console here. Let me go into a package called PO Planner. And with PO Planner, let me log in as Michelle Scott. So Michelle Scott is the supplier. And Michelle Scott gets the purchase order here. And she can, actually, there's a number of things that Michelle can do. Michelle can go to daily tasks as the supplier and see the status on existing POs. She might have done change requests and such. And you're seeing that right there, where they are, a revision for requesting the change. We have documentation. I can go into, directly to acknowledge it within the PO. And all we're doing is we're saying, okay, this acknowledge button ties to this status code logic and only bring up the orders that I can acknowledge. And by the way, on all of our grids, we have something to manage, the fields that they want to look at. In other words, the grid column. And then this is a download to Excel. We can do that on any of our grids. So if Michelle wanted to acknowledge this, and here are those 3 lines right there. If I click acknowledge and I go back to here it is right here. So I created the PO. I could have done it in PO requisitioning, but I just wanted to do it quickly. So if Michelle, under this condition right here, and this is supplier approval. So this is Michelle logging in, and the condition end here goes to terminate with approve. Or Michelle can say, I want to edit this. Now this becomes a collaborative Michelle buyer against Michelle supplier working with Michael the buyer on editing the PO before it goes into acknowledgement stage. Acknowledgement status within our app, or more companies want that also, if you don't have it right now, is a status in JD Edwards. You get better reporting that way on utilizing this new workflow. So with that, if I was to come back here and simply do some things, let's do a split on line 2. Might be for transportation, it might be for product reasons. But if we wanted to do a line split, it could be an approval process, but we made it no, allow the vendor to do a split, and 5433. So if we looked at the detail there, we can see the line is split. That's what I just did. And if Michelle wanted to do a change, let's say she wanted to change this, and once again, the reasons could be a database or UDC. So the quantity is, or the reason is product shortage. If I wanted to change this to 13 and say this is pricing discrepancy, and if I wanted to change this, say to a different promise date in JD Edwards, say December 1st, I can just say, hey, date extended, is that okay? And I can enter, and I won't get into the price change forms, but let me do an add comment here. Item is actually less than what you noted. So I'm going to add that comment. And the comment was, I click OK on there. And now I'm going to do an acknowledge with the change. But now it's coming up and it's saying, hey, there's some logic that says, if you're outside these tolerances, you got to pick up the phone and call. We're going to allow a 25%, and this is the buyer, allow 25% tolerance on quantity and 15% tolerance on price. And I did that purposely because it was quantity 9. I changed it to quantity 5, which hit that acknowledgement. So by doing this with the acknowledgement, I'm getting okay. And this was changed. So at this point, if I go to my emails, we can see that Michael is basically getting an email and saying, hey, supplier 4343 Aspen Paper is requesting changes. Here it is right here. And Michael can hit approve right here, approve, reject. We have links to access the portal. We can actually embed the credentials, the login and the password credentials. This is all making things very, very easy to allow, as an example, buyers, or more importantly, suppliers, to do things like approve, reject right from the email or the native app. And so with the native app, if I was to come out of here and log in as Michael Ledesma, and the approvals are, here, let me go back to the change, 5433. So say Michael approves this one, and then once again, in the workflow, we're going to show these conditions. So we do an approval on that. And all we're doing is showing 2 because that status was just moved up to approval. And the supplier gets a notification that that line was approved. From the perspective here, I also talked about the native app. So we have something called, register the native app. And sometimes this works and sometimes this doesn't work. So let me come here and see if okay, so it is working. So I'm on my iPhone here. I am able to go to, now what I would do is I would um, scan this. And by scanning this with my iPhone camera, I then register myself against this application. I've already done that. So I'm just going to hit login. And down here, I can come to the planning approval, and I can go to that email that I just did, or I should say the request, and I'm going to approve this. And it did approve it, and there on my cell phone is those two lines approved, which is the email that I just showed you. So this is what we mean by, and let me get back to, this is what we mean by the native app component. Younger folks definitely would like the idea of using a native app versus email, and it might be more efficient. If you're like me, I carry my phone around with me all the time, and I can react, and you can do things right from the phone, such as approve and such. That's an important thing to consider, either from the email or the native app notification directly. So now that I've done all of that, let's go back here to JD Edwards and look at the detail revision. And you can see that in JD Edwards, I requested Michelle as the supplier requested a change from 9 to 8 because 5 was out of tolerance. This one, we requested a change from 15 to 13 because the price was incorrect. On the third line, we changed the promise date to 12 to 21. And then I noticed the comments there. So what are those comments fields? We like to think that a media object is a great place to contain, call it the audit, so to speak, of the actions that are being done from our portal. So on the first line item, line 1 submitted for approval. That was Michelle. That was automatically embedded. So any type of action from the portal, and this is Michael accepting that change from 9 to 8. And this is simply another action that occurred that we embed in the media object. Now on this one, this one right here is where Michelle, the supplier, said add comment. So we get the actions that are automatically done along with allowing people to add from any user. And once again, you decide, do you want to allow them to have those permissions? So with that, I showed a couple of apps. I want to turn it over to Ben to cover the technical angles. We have other demos that I can show. But you know what? With that, I'm simply going to get into the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the workflow. Now that I showed you some characteristics of the user behavior, and Ben is going to show the details, how we work with additional JD Edwards logic, like the approval code logic inside of JD Edwards. And so what Ben is going to do is Ben's going to bring up the PO requisitioning. That's the one where I showed Marion creating a request, actually importing it, and Anita adding some more AP fields to it based on her roles and permissions. So Ben, go ahead and bring, well, first, before you do that, before you show, say, the easy buyer. Show the users an easy buyer first.
Sure. So I'm actually inside the IDE right now on the user management page. This is where you'll see all of the user IDs that are associated with the application. And this column right here is their authorizations. And this kind of defines what the users can and can't do within not only the workflow, different web pages on the application. So as you can see, this Marion Johnston is a user, and a user can create a requisition in this case. Lawrence Phillips is a manager who can approve the requisitions. We have Anita Nash, who is a procurement user, and she is the user that would actually send those requests to JDE to create a PO. And so those are the three main authorizations within this application, this procurement system. There's also an IT manager who is assigned to Jay Rice, and that just means if something goes wrong in JDE, this user can go in and fix the requisition and resubmit it if needed. So that's a little overview of the authorizations for the users. Now I should be able to go into the workflow itself and show you how all of this interacts together.
And so Ben, I'll quickly review the workflow from a very high level. Then I want you to get into some of the detail with the logic. So sure. What I did at the very start of my demonstration is I used a profile called Marion Johnson that created it. So that was the composing. We set her up with user role users, and anybody with that permission, user permission, can compose. But what you're seeing is that there's various conditions with that defines the logic. You saw that there was a withdraw button, and can you make it a little bit smaller there? There you go. So the withdraw just terminates it, and you saw that button. You see that there's a condition called pre-approve edit. I probably should have shown on the form, but there was a checkbox that said, you know what, we're uploading a vendor, but we don't have the vendor yet. So pre-approval edit basically means that if the form is missing the supplier number or item pricing, it has to go to pre-approve edit for somebody to fix that and then submit it further. Now, what I did is I did have a supplier, I did have pricing, so it did go on that green condition to approve, and that was to Anita Nash that added the additional, or actually the budget approval is Ignatius or Anita to do that. And the budget approval is an area that Ben is going to go through, because this is where we have a lot of logic that we call methods that you can, as an example, and he's going to show this, tie it to JDE approval route codes. You can do various loops inside here, tied to dollar thresholds, various limits and the number of approvals. And then, so he's going to focus on that budget approval, user role, and process, and how we're working against JD Edwards. From there, it goes to, a procurement, and then the dark blue with JDE. That doesn't mean a user is involved, Ben. That's a batch process. That's totally automated with no user interaction. It's a post-approve edit procurement, just allowing it to go through into JD Edwards to create the order number, right?
Correct. Yep.
And then if there's an error, like let's say there's branch plant or some accounting code error, it will go to that J Rice user profile, and that's the JDE error. So with that, Ben, why don't you explain to everybody exactly how this workflow was created, the details behind it, maybe do a change, but more important, like with budget approval, note some of those things that I mentioned, like tying it to JD Edwards approval routing code details.
Sure. So before I get into budget approval too much, I want to kind of explain how this is laid out and the parts of the different statuses here, just so you can kind of get an idea of how all this works together. So you saw me set up some users with some authorizations earlier, or you saw some users that were already set up. That is defined at each status as an actor. So if we have a specific type of user that we want to be the owner of a status, then we would define them as an actor. For instance, as Doug mentioned, pre-approval edit is owned by the procurement user, which just means that any user with a procurement authorization can approve a requisition in the status. And we can also assign specific users to these statuses as well. If we had like a list of users without an authorization that could act on this requisition, we would do that. We can also assign them to a requester as well. And so that's how the actors is laid out there. The actions and conditions are the actions are what the actors can provide to the status, and then the action will determine the condition, which are these branches coming out. It determines which one of these branches to take. So these are defined in this section here. And then there's also an arrival event and a completion event. The arrival obviously happens when a request reaches the status, and a complete event happens as it leaves the status. So for budget approval, I'll go ahead and go inside this complete event. And this is what Doug was talking about with this budget approval loop. You can see there's this branch that comes off of the status and goes back inside it if we need more budget approval. And so here's where it happens. Here's the logic that's defined inside this status. So we have this get manager method. And then afterwards, you can see this binary decision. If the current user has a manager, then we have to get approval from that manager. If it doesn't have a manager, then we can take this fully approved route. And if we go back to the canvas here, you can see this fully approved route goes straight to this post-approval edit status. So all of the logic for essentially determining the next approvers is happening in this kit manager method. And I have it pulled up right here. And this looks like a similar canvas as this one that I had opened. This is just the method canvas inside the Easy Process IDE. What we have here is just a collection of services, and it's kind of like a flow chart. It goes through logic to, in this case, determine the approvers at the status for a particular requisition. The workflow that's built into this is there are cost centers that you can have your requisition under, and depending on that cost center, that determines which approvers you may have and the limit of authority that these approvers have. So if it's above a certain limit, then you'll have these two approvers. If it's below a certain limit, you'll only have one. So this is all built in on the application side. What you could also do is link this to JDE via some approval route codes and pull the information from JDE based on this inquire service here. So you could just make an inquire to JDE. You could retrieve some data from the approval route status and then determine the approvers from this inquire. So that's a way that you could have this method tied to JD Edwards. But as of right now, this is the base built-in functionality, is just to have these cost centers and limit of authorities here. So that's how this budget approval status is working right now. So I want to go through a scenario And I'm going to pull this up on a copy of Easy Buyer just so it doesn't affect anything in the actual app. So this is a very similar looking workflow. The only difference is I have this final approval status right here. And the scenario that I want to go over is if a developer wants to add a final approval step after budget approval. So let's say there's a specific user that has to give the final say before a requisition goes to JDE. So this is where this would happen in this final approval status. So you can see from budget approval, it has this fully approved route and it goes straight to post-approval edit, where then it would go to JDE. We want to slip this final approval status into the workflow right here. And now, like I said before, you can define actors, actions, conditions, and the logic that goes into this status. So we'll work from the right to left. So we'll define an actor. And yeah, like I said before, in this scenario, we have a specific user that requisitions have to go through. And this is Edward Eichner in this case. So we'll add him as an actor. So he's the only one who can approve or deny the requisition. And there are going to be a couple actions and conditions here. And they're going to be approve and reject, because that's what the specific user is going to be doing with this requisition. And the conditions coming out are just going to be approve and reject as well. So I'll add one as green and one is red. We'll add those. Okay, so now you can see we have these bubbles coming out, which we can attach to other statuses. So if Edward Eichner approves, then we want to move to post-approval edit. If we reject, then we want to go all the way down to this rejection status that you saw before. And so now the last thing to do is define an arrival event and a completion event. So for an arrival event, when a request comes to the status, and this is already built in, I'll just connect it to the nodes here. It'll send a notification to Edward. And then this completion event, all we really need to do here is there's some services generated for us on the canvas already. So if Edward does a reject, then we want to take that reject path out of the status, down to the rejected status. And then if not, then if the action is approved, then we want to take the approval exit. And we'll connect all these up here. Okay, and now as easy as that, we built in another step of approval to this workflow. And I can show you this in action, actually. I have a requisition that's currently in budget approval, and I'm at the last approver. So once this approver approves, then it'll go down this fully approved route into final approval, and you'll see it in action here. So I'll log in as this user. The particular approver is Lawrence Phillips in this case. And so the action was by Marion Johnson. He submitted it to budget approval. First step of approval was Ignacio Haynes. He approved it, so it's going to another layer of approval, and that's Lawrence Phillips. And this should be the last approver in the budget approval status. So we'll go ahead and approve this requisition. And yeah, as you can see, the new status is final approval, which is that status that we built in, and it's assigned to this user, Edward Eichner, which we just assigned in this status. So we can log in as Edward just to finish off the workflow here. Go to his requisition search, and yeah, you can see that Lawrence Phillips did the action on this status, and it was fully approved and went to final approval. So we will approve this as Edward. And as expected, if we approved it, it goes to post-approval edit, and it's assigned to this role procurement, which Doug had mentioned earlier. Procurement will then approve this and send it to JDE to be created there. And so that's a simple way that you can take this this template and use our platform and easily add in another layer of approval to this requisitioning system.
And Ben, that was excellent. What you did was you add a lot of substance to the workflow, showing actually how to create a new process within the workflow. In this case, final approval with Edward. I think a lot of people understand that, and it helps us really explain the big reasons why people choose the Easy Process platform. Big companies like Chevron Asia Pacific, they had a project for employee self-service and manager self-service, and they tried using JD Edwards, but they had limitations on that, especially from an address book. They wanted to do things at a role level. So when employees are requesting vacation, it goes to a role, as an example, a drill rig operator, and that person or the people assigned to that role. And that's what you're seeing with Ben reviewing the details. And there's once again the variable that I talked about with complexity, and I showed quickly some examples of Carolina Biological with parallel workflow processes occurring at the same time, going back to AP or procurement for final submission with creating an item master. And we can tell many different stories, but I just want to reinforce, because I realize we're down to the last few minutes here, that what we're doing is actually, our approach endorsed by JD Edwards. They like the idea of keeping the customizations outside of JD Edwards. They provide all of the links. In a lot of the cases here, we're using the XML call object to call the business functions, parameterized database reads. More and more, we're doing projects with Orchestrator. We'd be happy to review that with you, and more specifically your requirements. I know there's only a few minutes left. Excuse me. And Allison, do we have any questions?
We do not.
Okay. Well, that's actually perfect. It's 1:57. We took up almost the entire hour. I want to thank everybody. I do want to reflect back on the point that I mentioned, where the new sales model is success guaranteed by doing a POC, not removing the risk completely with your vendor decision by moving forward with these what's called proof of concepts. And our proof of concept is very, very strong. And I want to reinforce it and review it very, very quickly. It's deploying the platform, easy process. We can do that in minutes so that you have logins. Optionally, you can take the training if you want yourself or the developers in your company to get involved with the project application. But then we have the gallery, and the beautiful part about the gallery is it's a great starting point. Like I showed some of the screenshots with Fox and some of our other accounts. It's not the final production where we're dealing with, okay, what's the GUI going to look like? We've got a lot of ideas on that based on experience, but it's working with yourself, with the gallery, transactionally, putting the process in place, working against your records, your logic. This is all at no cost. So we strongly encourage anybody that's watching this today to give us a call. You'll see a follow-up email with the recording, and we hope that we can engage you with the proof of concept and ideas tied to some of the topics that we reviewed in this workflow webinar. So with that, thank you very much. It's the top of the hour. Have yourself a great rest of the day. Bye now.